In a village untouched by greed, one man learned the price of taking more than he needed.
Most Africans today do not know that there were once villages where greed was treated as a public threat, not a private habit. In these places, a person could hoard grain, wealth, or resources only once, because the community believed that selfishness, if left unchecked, could destroy a people faster than war or famine. Our ancestors understood something modern society has forgotten. A community survives on generosity, not accumulation. This is the story of the village that punished greed, and the ancestral lesson we urgently need. Far beyond the hills of the western plains, surrounded by forests that whispered with wind and old wisdom, lay the ancient village of Nsoroko. It was neither rich nor powerful, neither feared nor envied. Yet the people of Nsoroko lived with a quiet dignity that puzzled neighboring settlements. Their granaries were rarely empty, their markets were peaceful, and their festivals were loud with drums, laughter, and roasted yams shared without measure. Visitors often asked, "How does Nsoroko survive so well when others struggle?" The elders would only smile and reply, "Because here we remember who our neighbor is." Nsoroko was built on a worldview older than any written scroll. No one person succeeds alone. A hunter who returned from the forest did not return for himself. His catch fed the mothers, the children, the elders, and only then his own hut. A farmer harvested for his household, yes, but also for the widow next door and the orphan that lived by the stream. Their strength was not in wealth, but in collective security. And so, even in lean seasons, Nsoroko endured while richer lands collapsed under their own selfish weight. But Nsoroko knew something dangerous lived within every human being. The elders called it iko, the hunger that never fills. Iko was not the hunger for food, it was the hunger for more, and more again. Even in a peaceful village, iko could appear in the form of a trader who kept an extra measure of salt beneath his stall, or a farmer who counted his yams twice at night to ensure no one had borrowed a piece. The village did not fear lions, drought, or raiders the way they feared iko, for those threats attacked from outside, but iko attacked from within. The elders believed that greed was like fire in dry grass. It started small, then consumed anything it touched. A greedy man, they would say, is worse than a thief, for a thief steals in the night and is satisfied. But greed steals every day and is never satisfied. And so Nsoroko treated greed as a public danger, equal to disease. A child caught hoarding groundnuts was corrected immediately. A young woman refusing to share palm oil was counseled gently. The message was clear: greed unchecked becomes poison, and the village would not allow poison to spread. At the heart of Nsoroko stood the Mbala Tree, old enough to have seen rivers change their course. Beneath that tree sat the Council of Elders, the custodians of law and memory. They were men and women whose eyes had grown sharp from watching human behavior over decades. The council met not only to settle disputes, but to preserve the values that kept the village alive. To them, justice was not punishment, it was correction. Their goal was not to destroy offenders, but to restore balance. It was the elders who watched for signs of iko. They observed the marketplace, the yam farms, the fishing pits by the river, and even the conversations around cooking fires. If a person began acting in ways that threatened communal peace, the council intervened before the sickness could spread. Once a month, the village gathered under the Mbala Tree, and the elders narrated stories of people ruined by greed in ancient times. Children listened wide-eyed, youth debated, mothers nodded in agreement, fathers murmured proverbs. The elders believed that culture must be taught constantly, for values fade not by force, but by neglect. And so, Nsoroko remained strong, not because of walls, but because of wisdom. One rainy season, Nsoroko faced a challenge that would test its foundations. A young trader named Okoro, newly returned from traveling caravans, set up a stall in the central market. Okoro was clever, ambitious, and quick with calculations. His goods, salt, beads, dried fish, and cowhorn trinkets were desirable, and his charm drew customers daily. But unlike other traders who measured profit by how much they shared, Okoro measured success by how much he kept. Slowly he began to set aside portions of his goods in sealed calabashes, hidden in his hut beneath woven mats. He told no one. He believed no one noticed. But Nsoroko noticed everything. When a widow came to buy salt and could not pay immediately, Okoro refused credit. When children begged for leftover fish pieces after market hours, he turned them away. When a mother pleaded for 2 calories reduction, he smiled politely and declined. None of these actions were crimes, yet each left an invisible bruise on the fabric of the village. Rumors traveled like smoke between rooftops. Okoro does not share. Okoro counts too much. Okoro's hut smells of fish, even at night. The elders listened, and their brows grew heavy. In Nsoroko, greed was rarely confronted immediately. The elders believed in watching before acting, for a tree can be misjudged before it bears fruit. So they observed Okoro through the season of long rains. When the river overflowed and the yam pits flooded, families leaned on one another as they always had. But this time, the generosity was not equal. While others shared cassava, palm oil, and roasted yams around hearths, Okoro's hut remained shut. Smoke curled from his rooftop at night, a pot simmered inside, yet no visitor was invited to sit or taste. Children whispered that Okoro ate like a king, while others managed on scrap meals. Mothers whispered that he sold food, but refused mercy. Fathers whispered that Iko had found a new host. In Nsoroko, whispers were not merely gossip, they were early warning signals. Community survival depended on sensing danger before it became catastrophe. And so the elders traced the whispers to their source, like hunters trailing a scent. When the rains ended and the festivals approached, they summoned Okoro to sit under the Mbala Tree. The village gathered, curious and quiet, for they knew that the council only summoned those whose hearts risked endangering the whole. Okoro approached the Mbala Tree cautiously, the midday sun casting dappled shadows across the village square. The elders sat in solemn silence, their eyes piercing and calm. Children gathered at the edges, curious but respectful. Even the animals seemed to pause, sensing the weight of tradition. The village had never summoned someone lightly. This moment carried the gravity of communal survival. Elder Amale, her silver hair braided and wrapped in ceremonial cloth, spoke first. "Okoro, you have brought Iko into your heart," she said. "Greed is not theft. It is a sickness of the spirit, and this sickness spreads silently." Okoro's mouth went dry. He had expected anger, punishment, maybe ridicule, but not words that cut to the soul. The elders reminded him of the village values: sharing, balance, generosity, and vigilance for one another. "A person who hoards today steals the peace of tomorrow," Elder Kwesi added, his voice steady. The community listened. The gravity of the moment resonated like drums in their chests. Okoro began to understand that this was not a tribunal to shame him, but a reflection, an opportunity to correct his ways before the sickness spread further. To illustrate the weight of his actions, the elders led Okoro to the village granary, a structure older than any living memory. Its walls were stacked high with yams, millet, and sorghum, the lifeblood of the village through lean seasons. Elder Amale gestured toward the overflowing baskets. "See these grains?" she said. "Each one is a promise. If one person takes more than needed, the promise falters." The elders reminded Okoro of last year's rains when flooding destroyed some fields. Only collective sharing and careful stewardship had kept the village alive. If someone hoarded even a portion of the food, the risk multiplied. The community could have faced famine. Okoro's heart thumped. He realized the small calabashes hidden in his hut were more than food. They were a threat to every child, elder, and family in Nsoroko. The granary became a mirror. His greed reflected not just his desire, but the potential ruin of many. He bowed, understanding that true wealth in Nsoroko was measured not by what one kept, but by what one gave to preserve the harmony of all. The elders instructed Okoro to spend a day alone in the forest outside the village, the sacred place where ancestors were said to whisper through the rustling leaves. There he meditated on his actions and listened to the wind that carried the stories of generations. Each tree seemed to speak, lessons of unity, of sacrifice, of foresight. He remembered the smiles of children denied small portions, the worried faces of mothers, the quiet murmurs of elders. Iko, the hunger that never fills, pressed against his chest. In the forest, he could no longer pretend the hoarded goods were his alone. He understood that greed, though satisfying in isolation, broke the invisible threads that bound the village together. By sunset, Okoro returned with a changed spirit. The elders met him at the edge of the forest, their eyes reflecting a mix of caution and hope. The community gathered in silence, sensing transformation. Elder Kwesi spoke softly. "The forest will tell us if your heart is ready to restore what was taken from the people." On the following morning, Okoro approached the village square, carrying baskets filled with the goods he had secretly hoarded. Women and children watched, whispers spreading like wind through the market stalls. Each step felt heavy, yet lighter than the weight of guilt he had carried. He placed the baskets before the elders, bowing his head. Elder Amali inspected them, her eyes softening. "Okoro," she said, "you return what was never yours alone to keep. This is the first step toward healing." The villagers, initially cautious, began to understand. One by one, families approached, sharing small gifts of food and trinkets with Okoro, reinforcing the cycle of generosity. The elders explained that the act was not merely restitution, it was reconciliation with the spirit of the village. By returning what he had withheld, Okoro restored balance, not only materially but socially and spiritually. The lesson was clear: self-interest must never outweigh the welfare of the collective. Children watched wide-eyed, remembering this day forever. Parents whispered the moral under their breath, ensuring it would be taught at hearths and future harvests. Okoro felt a sense of relief, a warmth that no hidden calabash could ever provide. Harmony returned. The village elders declared a festival of renewal, celebrating both the harvest and the restoration of communal values. Drums echoed from every corner, fires flickered in the twilight, and the smell of roasted yams and cassava filled the air. This festival, held once every year, was now imbued with the story of Okoro's transformation. Okoro, dressed in simple cloth, walked among the villagers, helping children light candles and elders prepare offerings. He felt not pride, but belonging. The realization that wealth shared became greater than wealth kept. Mothers clapped to the rhythm of drums, fathers nodded, and elders smiled knowingly. Each act of participation reminded the community of what truly mattered: unity, generosity, and vigilance against Iko, the greed within. Elder Amale addressed the village. "Today we celebrate more than a harvest. We celebrate a spirit renewed. Let this story remind us that greed can be corrected, not punished alone, and that every heart has the power to choose generosity." The villagers cheered, danced, and sang. Even Okoro's eyes glistened with tears. For the first time, he understood that life was measured not by what one keeps, but by how one nurtures the bonds that tie people together. The festival became a legend, a story passed down through generations, teaching that the heart of a village is generosity, and selfishness is its silent enemy. Word of Okoro's transformation traveled beyond Nsoroko, reaching nearby villages and distant travelers. They spoke not of wealth or trade, but of how one young man's humility restored harmony. Elders from neighboring settlements came to witness the festival of renewal, eager to understand the customs that protected Nsoroko from greed and discord. Okoro, once a symbol of selfishness, became a living lesson. Travelers observed him helping mothers carry water, distributing food without hesitation, and teaching children to share. He had learned that leadership and respect were earned not through accumulation, but through generosity and integrity. Even the youngest children began mimicking his actions, understanding instinctively that the village thrived when everyone acted for the common good. Stories of the village and its customs became a tool for teaching morality, ethics, and responsibility. The elders smiled, knowing that by correcting one individual's heart, they had strengthened the spirit of the entire community. Nsoroko's example spread like wildfire, a small village whose wisdom protected it from the destruction that greed inevitably brings. Yet the elders knew Iko, the hunger that never fills, was never gone. It only slept. The community understood that human nature was fragile and that vigilance must be constant. Stories of Okoro's greed became part of the oral tradition, told as cautionary tales to prevent others from succumbing. One evening, a trader from afar arrived, carrying spices and tales of cities where wealth ruled above all. The villagers welcomed him but remained wary. Elder Kwesi whispered to Okoro, "Even the purest heart can forget if not reminded." Okoro nodded, realizing that his transformation must be reinforced by action, teaching, and living examples. Iko could emerge subtly: a child refusing to share a prized tool, a young man hiding grain, a neighbor keeping extra firewood. Nsoroko's wisdom demanded that community correction and storytelling remain alive, so Iko could never gain root again. The village thrived, but with humility, always aware that greed is not defeated once. It must be confronted daily. The elders selected young villagers to be initiates of wisdom, apprentices in the art of observing, guiding, and teaching others. Okoro volunteered, hoping to repay the lessons that had saved him from selfish ruin. The initiates gathered beneath the Mbala Tree, where the elders taught them about Iko, communal survival, and the cycles of generosity. Each lesson was tied to action, distributing harvests, mediating disputes, and reminding peers of the ancestral code. They were trained to notice subtle greed, correct it gently, and share stories that inspired reflection. Through storytelling, the youth learned that moral lessons were more potent when embedded in narrative. They practiced recounting tales of past mistakes, using imagery, emotion, and suspense to ingrain values in the community. Okoro, once a cautionary example, now became a mentor, proving that redemption and transformation can ripple outward, influencing generations beyond the immediate circle. On nights when the moon rose full, the elders spoke of the ancestors as if they were present, their voices echoing through the rustling leaves and river currents. They explained that greed had once destroyed entire tribes, yet communities like Nsoroko survived because they treated Iko as a spiritual threat. Okoro listened, understanding that wealth alone could never secure life. Values, discipline, and communal harmony were the true treasures. The ancestors' lessons emphasize reciprocity. What one gives returns multiplied in protection, reputation, and respect. Generosity was not optional. It was a survival strategy. Villagers practiced rituals to honor these teachings, offering food, reciting proverbs, and recounting moral tales. Through these actions, the lessons became internalized, remembered, and passed down. Okoro marveled at how culture could shape behavior, ensuring the longevity of a society. The village had survived external threats, famine, and natural disasters, not because of swords or walls, but because the heart of each person aligned with the community's well-being. Even in the present day, Okoro's story carries wisdom. Cities and nations often fall prey to greed, corruption, and inequality. Yet the lesson from Nsoroko remains clear. Community and generosity outlast self-interest and accumulation. Okoro shared his story with visitors, travelers, and children. The greatest wealth, he said, is not counted in coins, but in the harmony and trust we cultivate with others. People listened, captivated by the ancestral insight that applied to markets, families, and governments alike. Nsoroko's traditions reminded Okoro, and all who heard the tale, that the human heart must be trained to resist Iko. Greed may arise naturally, but awareness, storytelling, and action can guide it toward generosity. Communities everywhere could survive challenges, grow, and flourish, if only they remembered that no one thrives. And so the wisdom of Nsoroko whispers across generations, inviting all who listen to choose harmony over greed, and to measure life not by what is kept, but by what is shared.
These stories survive only when they are remembered.
These stories survive only when they are remembered.